Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. If I can call the meeting to order, please. Welcome to today's meeting of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to begin with some items of housekeeping, please, regarding the conduct of the meeting. May I remind you that this meeting is a hybrid meeting and therefore we have a number of participants who are joining remotely. I would therefore ask for everyone's patience regarding that. Furthermore, the meeting is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be, as usual, available on the Council's YouTube channel following the meeting. To help with the smooth running of the meeting, if you are joining remotely, I'd be grateful if you would mute your microphone when you're not speaking, use the raise your hand button when you would like to raise an issue, and then lower it again after you've finished speaking, and to not use the chat function for debate amongst one another. For those attending in person, please remember to activate your microphone when speaking and to turn it off again when you're finished, otherwise the people online cannot hear you and you won't be picked up in the recording. Myself and the officers attending will monitor proceedings with a view to ensuring all requests to speak are seen. So, turning to the officers attending today's meeting, those are Margaret McCrossan, Head of Accountancy, Barbara Clark, our Chief Accountant, Linda Hutchison, Clerk to the Committee, Leona Allison, Assistant Committee Services Officer, and of course Lorraine McMillan, the Chief Executive of the Council. The external audit team, Audit Scotland, we are joined by John Boyd and Louisa Yule. For the last time, I think, perhaps, as Audit Scotland are of course outgoing, and we thank you for all of your efforts so far. And we're being joined online by the new external audit team from Ernst & Young. That's Rob Jones, Grace Scanlon and Melanie McAdam. So very warm welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. That brings us to the formal agenda for this afternoon's meeting. May I ask Clerk if there are any apologies? I'm aware of Provost Montague.
That's the only apology I have, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Clerk. And item number 2, are there any declarations of interest for items on the agenda? There are no declarations of interest. So, item number 3 is the presentation of the 21-22 annual accounts for the Council's charitable trusts. I'd like to call upon you to speak on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just make a brief comment before we hand over to our external auditors. I just want to say, both for this item and for the next one, that I'm really delighted that we've managed to meet the deadline of presenting the accounts for sign-off prior to the 31st of October. It's been challenging to achieve this, as most of the audit work is still conducted remotely, and the date has been brought forward from last year's date of November to the 31st of October this year. So it's been a great effort from both my own accountancy team and from Audit Scotland as well. And before we hand over to Audit Scotland to report on their findings for the charities and the council accounts themselves, I just want to take this time to thank them very much for their work over the last 6 years and for the positive working relationship that we have enjoyed with all of the team, past and present. And I know our incoming auditors, Ernst & Young, are joining us virtually today, so I'm looking forward to meeting them and to working with them for the next 5 years too. But it's really, today's all about the audited accounts, and so I'm handing over now to our external auditors to take us through.
That's great, thank you, Margaret. And I would just like to place on record the committee's thanks and appreciation for your work and that of your team, and meeting this deadline, which has been no mean feat. I'd like to invite Audit Scotland now to speak to the Trust. Thank you.
Good afternoon and thank you, Chair. The attached report outlines the conclusion of our work on the East Renfrewshire Council Trust Funds. Appendix A includes our proposed independent auditor's report, and Appendix B includes a letter of representation that will be returned by the Chief Finance Officer to provide representations around the accounting records and the preparation of the accounts. We have now completed all our audit work in relation to the trust funds. I am pleased to inform you that the proposed independent auditor's report is an unqualified opinion. This is the outcome you're looking for. and states that the financial statements properly present the receipts and payments of the charities for the year ended 31st March 2022 and the statement of balances at the year end. There is one matter as outlined at paragraph 11 that I would like to draw your attention to. This is in relation to the funds that could be considered dormant. This is where there is no expenditure in the trust fund for a number of years. Two of the charitable trusts, the Lieutenant Stuff Memorial Institute and the Endowment for Talented Children and Young People, have not incurred any expenditure for a number of years. This was raised in the prior year, and the trustees have responded in the resolution paragraph with providing an indication of plans for the coming year. I would like to thank the trustees and the finance officers for their assistance over the course of the audit. It's been greatly appreciated, and I'm happy to respond to any questions.
That's great. Thank you, Louisa. I would now like to open the floor to questions from members present and members online. If anyone would like to raise any questions. Not getting anything online. I'd like to ask a question on the endowment for the talented children and young people. Just for clarification, I believe that a potential beneficiary has now been identified. Is that correct?
Our education colleagues have been looking at potential beneficiaries, and we hope that they'll be able to come up with a definite proposal. I know that they've got one or two children in mind at the moment, so we're just waiting for them to formalise that. But I do expect that we will be able to utilise that fund in the course of the current year. There's not much remaining in the balance there, but we do hope that it will be utilised.
That's great. Thank you, Margaret. And it's good to know that one of the points is potentially already resolved. So if there are no questions, I propose that we accept the accounts and the clean audit report presented and move on to item 4. Agreed? Okay, thank you. So item 4 is the 2021-22 annual accounts and draft annual audit report for the Council as an entity. And I'd like to call on Margaret McCrossan again to present the accounts. Thank you.
Again, I would reiterate it's probably an even greater achievement managing to get the full accounts for the Council ready for the October deadline. And I don't want to steal the thunder of my audit friends there, so I'm not going to say any more. I'm just going to pass it straight across.
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks, Chair. Members, this is our external audit report. It's structured similar to the presentation that you've received in terms of the trusts, in that we present our independent auditor's report, our letter of representation that will be asked to be signed on behalf of the Council, and then we include our annual external audit report for the year. I'll cover the annual external audit report summarising the key points in our audit, but this covers our financial statements audit as well as our responsibilities under the Code of Audit Practice, covering the wider scope audit dimensions of public sector audit, covering financial management, financial sustainability, governance and transparency and value for money. Touching on the financial statements audit, I would just like to pass on firstly my thanks to Margaret and Barbara and the wider finance team for all their help and support during the course of the audit. Again, our audit has been predominantly delivered remotely this year, which creates its own unique challenges, not just to the audit of the Council but to the audit sector as a whole. However, pleased to report that our audit has been completed, and we intend to sign prior to the reporting deadline. I'm also pleased to report we intend to issue an unmodified audit opinion, essentially no modifications or significant issues in relation to the audit of the financial statements. You will see in the report we've included in the appendix to our annual report, there's details of some of the audit adjustments raised during the course of the audit, and we are satisfied that these have been reflected within the final audited accounts. In terms of this year's financial statements audit, an area of significant focus this year has been around areas of estimates and judgments, and you'll note in our annual audit report a change from the plan, our external audit plan, where we increased the risk around valuation of property, plant, equipment. And this is an area as a sector reflecting on revised auditing standards. The auditors have increased the level of focus and attention, and it's expected that auditors increase the level of focus and attention around significant estimates and judgments where there's an increased risk of material misstatement. But I'm pleased to report that there were no issues arising from that work. In terms of our wider scope audit dimensions, we've included a brief summary as well as some detail within those areas. I'm comfortable to report that there's no significant issues to draw the committee's attention to. The Council has appropriate and effective financial management arrangements, and this is reflected within the underspend reported in the year. We have, however, reflected the financial challenges facing the Council, and not just this Council, but essentially all councils across Scotland, particularly around some of the emerging inflationary pressures, as well as the wider economic uncertainty, and that these should continue to be reflected within medium-term financial planning. Our report also touches on governance and transparency arrangements, reflecting the establishment of the arrangements following the recent local elections and committee membership. We've also reported how the Council demonstrates its value for money and how it achieves best value, and are pleased to report there are no significant issues to draw to the committee's attention. The report includes an action plan with detailing observations that we've identified during the course of the audit, and these have been accepted by officers with targeted response dates. We've also followed up on those recommendations reflected in prior year. Happy to take any questions on the report, and just really to pass on my thanks again, not only for this year's audit, but on behalf of my colleagues for the last 6 years of our audit appointment. And we will be having sort of handovers with your new auditors, Ernst & Young, over the coming months, so that there's a smooth transition with hopefully minimum disruption to officers. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, John. Are there any members who'd like to ask questions on what they've seen, what they've heard? Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Just drawing your attention to page number 33, which discusses the extent to which the procedures of detecting irregularities, which would include fraud, and it does discuss that fraud is inherently more difficult to detect than error. I would ask, what would you say would be your own recommendation to assure that we can detect these cases of fraud more readily and more effectively going forward? Because we have in the past, been in positions where the Council has been, in some cases, quite publicly, there have been cases where fraud has been attempted on the Council, quite significant amounts of money, and obviously that does reflect quite badly on the Council with the general public. We want to make sure that we have systems in place that give the perception, on top of the fact that there are actually systems in place that are effective, that can identify these frauds. I would ask what you would recommend going forward to make those stronger.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor. John?
Thanks. So in terms of audit's responsibilities in relation to fraud and irregularities, under auditing standards we're required to specifically focus on the risk of fraud. That includes considerations of the Council's arrangements to prevent and detect against the risk of fraud of material misstatement in the financial statements. So essentially, as part of our audit work, we're looking to understand what systems and controls and processes you have in place to do that. Now, as part of a public sector audit, we consider areas such as your internal control environment, looking at key systems and processes. We also look at the work of internal audit, and we'll look at the Council's involvement in the NFI, the National Fraud Initiative exercise. Ultimately, what that does is really identify and target our audit procedures. So where we consider there to be a risk of material misstatement to the annual accounts. Now, that may be different to what Council would consider to be essentially operationally material, if you like. So ours is really focusing on the financial statements audit, as opposed to wider fraud below those values. So essentially, as part of our audit work, we would report on any areas where we think there could be control enhancements or improvements. In terms of the areas where we thought areas could be strengthened, they were included within our previous recommendations that were presented at the previous committee in terms of just our management report. We didn't find any of those significant enough to impact in terms of our audit opinion or our overall audit approach in terms of the risk of material misstatement, but just in sense of tightening control environment. Don't know if that addresses the question.
Yeah, that's absolutely
I'll come back, Councillor McDonald, then I have Councillor Ireland online. Do you have anything further you'd like to add, Councillor McDonald? Are you quite happy?
Sorry, yeah, that's me complete on that.
Okay, thank you. In which case, I have Councillor Ireland online.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was, wait till I get the page in front of me, page 54, paragraph 24, looking at the Lieutenant Stuff Memorial and the comments that were made in that paragraph, saying that work has recently been undertaken, but no request for grant funding from this trust fund has been received. In the report that came before the paper before us, it was noted that some improvement works have been underway, and we expect to make a contribution from the fund towards the costs. So I suppose what I'm asking is, how much of a request from the Council will this be that will go against that fund, and when will this be made? I noted that there's currently just over £12,000 in that bank account. So I'm just looking at what percentage of this will be taken to go towards those refurbishment.
Councillor Ireland, the audio at this end is a little echoey. Could you repeat? No, we're not, I'm afraid. Could you repeat the page number and the paragraph number you refer to, please?
Paragraph 54. Page 54, paragraph 24. And it's talking about work undertaken at the Duff Memorial Hall, and that no request for grant funding has been received. But in the previous paper, it says that we expect to make a contribution from the fund towards the costs. So I'm wondering, how much will that be, and when will this be made? And then I just had one other comment about the underspends. I'm just wondering if you're hearing me okay at the moment. Sorry, Chair, are you hearing me?
No, the numbers are not tying up, I'm afraid, Councillor Ireland. Is the page number you're referring to the page of the full Council papers, or a page of a document from within it?
Dear. It should be on the annual accounts.
So what's the...
Page 24.
Page 24.
54.
Page 54 is paragraphs 42 to 46.
No, I must have the wrong. I do apologise. Can anyone answer me, though, how much will be asked against the Duff Memorial Hall Fund for the refurbishments?
Page 48, that's great. Thank you very much. John, Louisa, are you... yes, fine. Yes.
Yes, we've been liaising with our property colleagues on this one. Work has continued into the current financial year. We're trying to finalise the the spend on that hall at the moment. Project's been going on for some time, and it's just about being finalised at the moment. And once we get the final sum, we can determine how much of the balance of the Duff Trust can be applied against that. So that's why I'm saying, again, like the previous inquiry about the trust accounts, we expect that there'll be a draw on the Lieutenant's Duff Memorial in the current year, which will contribute to the cost of the works that are just being finalised now, and we're just finalising these costs.
That's great. Thank you, Margaret. So just to clarify for the record, so that's paragraph 24 on page 48. I think you had a second question, Councillor Ireland. I just don't want that to be lost in the...
I did, yes. It was just on the general fund underspend for 21-22, which was reported at 3.852 million. I do understand why work had to be taken this time to create that underspend as we're going into the next year's budget. But what assurances, I suppose what I'm looking for is, what assurances can now be given that the annual budget figures will not go into underspend as we move forward? The reason I'm asking is there's some very, very difficult decisions that require to be taken as we all approach our budgets, and it does need to be incredibly accurate, that information. So I'm just wondering, I know this is something that Audit Scotland has picked up on before, but they also say that they do understand why the most recent figures, they are what they are. But I just want to know and have assurance that this underspend won't happen, I suppose, after next year's budget, because it's so critical, those decisions we have to take.
That's great. Thanks, sir. Thank you, Councillor Ireland. I'd like to invite Margaret McCrossan to address that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I would reiterate that the outturn position for 21-22 was a managed position, and we deliberately were trying to achieve a significant underspend. And for the last 4 months of the year, we had effectively instructed all departments to avoid all but essential spend, so that we could generate a larger underspend to apply to the budget challenges that were coming up ahead. We would not have come in with an underspend position of 3.8 million if we had not done that. So it's not a natural 3.8 underspend that was in the budget. It was managed. As for assurances in the current year, at the moment, given the financial challenges that we're facing, particularly with inflation, the revenue monitoring statements that have been produced and gone public so far are indicating that at the moment we're tracking in terms of overspending rather than underspending. And again, we've asked directors to take action to go back to focusing only on essential spend, to try to bring things back to a balanced budget level. In previous years, we've been looking to come in under budget to help us with future years. At the moment, the first priority is to get back on track and balance the budget so that we're not deepening any problems at the 31st of March. And at the moment, as I say, that's what we're very actively monitoring with all our statements just now, to make sure that we try to come in as a balanced budget. Things are certainly going to be tough for future years, but we're not certainly in a stage of saying we're trying to achieve underspends in the current year, because it's going to be difficult enough just getting back to a balanced position.
That's great. Thank you, Margaret. I don't see any further hands raised or any other questions in the chamber. I have a question I'd like to ask on page 139, which is the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. So it's really just a point to clarify there. There's been a pretty large actuarial gain on the pension revaluation of 92.1 million. Now, that shows other comprehensive income of almost 120 million. I think, just to clarify for the record, that is not surplus the council has of any means. Perhaps it would be worth just explaining that a little, and why there's such a large revaluation amount on the pension fund. Thank you.
Thanks. So the actuarial pension fund, in terms of the comprehensive income and expenditure, reflects it's an IAS 19 valuation. So essentially, every year the actuary will revisit an estimate of what the council's share of pension fund assets and liabilities are. The liabilities contain a significant degree of estimation because they're essentially forecast pension costs made up of existing members or retired members. Where there's a significant, and you'll see essentially the movement that you have recognised through the comprehensive income and expenditure reflects the volatility in that liability, and on the council's balance sheet, you'll see the shift in the liability of the defined benefit pension fund, going from 119 million down to 150 million. That movement in year, it's actually a combination of factors. So it reflects asset performance in a year, so from the 1st of April to the 31st of March, but it also reflects changing assumptions around life expectancy or discount rates and wider kind of movements, or essentially what the actuary has determined you would expect to pay. The reason it's not essentially council's money is that money essentially goes through to the reserve, so movements go through the pension reserve, and that's a required reserve under the code, which essentially offsets. So what you reflect essentially going through your general fund is the annual cost of pension contributions paid each year. As part of our audit work, we engage with PwC, who on behalf of all public sector auditors across the UK actually will review the assumptions made by the actuaries, in this case Hymans Robertson, to ensure that they remain appropriate, and we perform analytical procedures over the outturns to essentially get comfort that the values you're reporting are materially correct.
That's great. Thank you, John. That's I'll provide a lot of clarity. Councillor Wallace, Councillor Edlin, do you have any questions you'd like to ask, or should we move on to acceptance?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. So on that basis, there are no further questions. Can I move that we accept the draft accounts and the draft annual audit report? Agreed? I see some nods of assent online. That's great. John, Louisa, thank you very much. Margaret, thank you. And that now draws the meeting to a close. Thank you.